course. So you guys know companions in guilt arguments for moral realism, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it goes as follows, like just to explain the argument a little bit. If moral realism is false, then normative epistemic realism is also false. And it basically, what the realist is trying to do here is basically saying, look, if you reject moral realism, then you also need to reject a normative epistemic realism. And this is seen as, that the anti-realist is biting a big bullet there, that this is, not plausible, etc. And then obviously there is the third level, that if you reject normative epistemic realism, then you don't have a stance-independent epistemic reason to justify your belief in
It's like
anti-realism.
self-defeating, basically.
It's self-defeating, but that
Yeah.
will be true only if you accept that you need
Yeah,
stance-independent
no, I don't
normative
accept
epistemic
it,
realism.
but yeah.
Yeah, of
I
course,
just
yeah.
wanted,
Yeah.
okay.
So on the contrary, I made companions in innocence argument for moral anti-realism, and it goes as follows. If moral realism is true, then price realism is also true. So both of those goals like companions in guilt. And just to explain what price realism is to people, I'll be surprised if you know about it, because I just invented it like 3 days ago. So I'll just read it out. So price realism is the belief that the prices of products or services are intrinsic to them and do not depend on our attitudes, preference, or appraisals. Right. We often hear people say that certain things are expensive, so that's a value judgment, while others are cheap. It seems that prices guide our actions. We often seek to buy things that comfort our budgets. Moreover, we frequently encounter significant disagreement regarding prices for particular items or services. In these disagreements, people strive to determine the real price that is independent of our appraisal. And price anti-realism fails to explain those disagreements, because if prices were solely dependent on our appraisals, such disagreements would not make sense. Furthermore, we can imagine that if we desire an item to cost a specific amount of money, the price simply does not change. And this is evidence for price realism. If you're a price anti-realist, you cannot evaluate anything as expensive or cheap, since those terms are reserved for the price realists, and those terms are normative and irreducible. This is simply how language functions. Any attempt to assess something as cheap or expensive as a price anti-realist would be an acknowledgement of price realism. So basically,
that's good. I'm convinced personally. I think it's pretty great. Yeah.
So it's
I'm convinced too. I'm a price realist.
And we have, 100%. And we like the thing is, guys, we can have this little thought experiment right here. So imagine John is going to buy some stuff, and he has a list, and we know exactly what John wants to buy. But when John returns back to us after his shopping, we notice that John bought some extra items, and we asked him, why did you buy those? And he just said that he had a reason. And we asked him, well, what's the reason? And he just said, well, the price was right. So from this we can deduce that some prices are right,
the price and other prices itself is the reason
giving. It is reason giving, exactly. It is reason giving, and we can also make a bigger claim that is intrinsically motivating, because he just said the price was right. That's the reason. It gave him a reason, and if the price was wrong, he simply wouldn't buy the items. Yeah. And this is obviously a parody position, but we can mimic everything that the moral realist says with price.
Yeah, but is it the same thing as like gastronomic realism, or is the price being the right thing?
I mean, they're both
does
like
that make it different?
That's right. It is similar, however, it is similar to gastronomic realism. However, my concern with gastronomic realism from debating moral realists on Discord is they just accept it. So I had to
Wait,
come
wait,
with
wait,
something
wait.
new.
Wait,
Oh,
they
really?
accept
They
gastronomic
just say
realism?
that like pizza tastes objectively good or something like
Stands
that?
independently
No
tasty.
way.
Yeah.
No
Wow.
way.
I
No
mean,
way.
look, I have a folder with screenshots. Some realists just accept it, and I had another
I wouldn't have
parity
expected
premise
that.
with
But
aesthetic
but but
realism.
but but yeah, my question was like, is that
Yeah,
different from the guess? Like, is your like I guess economic or maybe not economic, but like money realism
price
different
realism.
from
Yeah. I can comment on this.
yeah.
It is different, and part of the reason it's different isn't well, it can be cashed out in terms of how, if you're offering sort of plausible characterizations of how people actually speak and think in the everyday circumstances. With gastronomic stuff, it really does appear that it's much more closer to a more subjective and expressivist way of people talking about food. So if someone says this pizza's delicious, it actually isn't radically implausible to say that's just an expression. They're not trying to assert a proposition. It's not that implausible to say that they're making a subjective claim about their personal preferences, and they're not trying to universalize the claim and say that it stands independently delicious. It's not that implausible. But and you might think, and to some extent it probably is with price, because I think a lot of people, especially professional philosophers that understand moral realism, would react to price realism by going, oh, this is clearly satirical. Like, of course, I don't have the intuition that price realism is true. So they'd probably do that. But the point is just not so much that it's a sort of direct appeal to the intuitions or anything like that, because I doubt many people have price realism intuitions, at least not professional philosophers, although maybe some do. The point is that what's really cool about it is if you look at the way that a lot of realists critique anti-realist positions, it's often on the basis of a supposedly sophisticated analysis of ordinary moral claims. And so the way that that works, for instance, Mike Humer does this, where Mike Humer has this like 1, 2, 3 knockout, where Humer basically says this: look, you've only got a few anti-realist options, and then you've got realism. And if I could make an argument against the anti-realist positions, I demonstrate realism is true. So here's how this works. Okay, well, the expressivist, the non-cognitivist, says that moral claims just express non-propositional content. Well, that's ridiculous because of the Frege-Geach problem. So, you can't, it doesn't make sense to say if boo murder, then boo this or boo that. Like it can't figure into an argument. And yet moral claims do clearly, intuitively, it seems they can figure into arguments. And then other things like you can't really deliberate. Is it really the case that boo? That doesn't make sense, but it does seem reasonable to think, is it really the case that murder is wrong? In the same way you might think, is it really the case that there's life on Mars or whatever? And so it looks like structurally and syntactically, it functions propositionally. So we rule out non-cognitivism. And then you do this for error theory and relativism. Well, do we think it's really the case that if our society thought murder was okay, then murder would be okay? No, that's silly. Is it the case that I think if suddenly I got hit in the head and I thought murder was okay, that murder would be okay? No, that's silly. So we rule out subjectivism and cultural relativism. And then finally, error theory. The error theorist would say that it's not true that murder is wrong, or like the statement murder is wrong is not true. That's ridiculous. And so we rule out error theory. And so, well, we've ruled out the only possible anti-realist position, so realism wins by default. So that's one type of move that Humer has made. And so you can actually do something very similar with price realism, where when people are talking about the prices of products, you can reason stuff like this. For instance, if cars are more expensive than bikes and bikes are more expensive than shoes, then cars are more expensive than shoes. Or if a Lamborghini is more expensive than a Prius, then you would have to spend more money then you ought to spend more money to acquire it. It is more expensive, so you ought to spend more money to acquire it. Stuff like that. You could embed price claims in arguments like pretty easily. And you could also think, is the price of a diamond really $3? Well, look, it looks like the way you deliberate about price has this seeming, it's not made true by your preferences. And so it doesn't seem that non-cognitivism makes sense of the way that we talk about price. We really do talk about price propositionally. There are facts about what things cost. So you set aside price non-cognitivism. That's a stupid view. It doesn't work. Cognitivism about price at minimum. So then we go to relativism. Well, if all of our society decided that a particular thing was more expensive than another, would it be more expensive? Well, no, because think about if a particular community of people all decide that, let's say we want to import a product from another country, and we want to buy, I don't know, amber from a country that has amber, and they all, as a culture, decide it's worth $1 billion an ounce, would you have to pay $1 billion an ounce? No, because you don't agree on the price. So the mere fact that that culture thinks it's worth something doesn't really make it worth something. So cultural price relativism is obviously false. Cultures can't just decide what things cost. And then you do this at the individual level. I can't go to a store and say, I go to the store and I want to buy a Lamborghini, and they tell me I don't know how much Lamborghinis cost. I've never shopped for one, but I want to buy one.
$250.
250,000?
No, $2.50.
No, that's not how much
He's joking.
So I go to the store and they tell me, let's look it up. How much is it? I've got to know.
Yeah, but I
I'm not done with the whole. I want to finish.
I know you're not done, but I just want to while you're
I'm
looking
gonna
this
finish
up,
that.
like I just want to say this just sounds stupid. Of course
the
we
point
decide.
here is that
Of course,
the point
we
is that
decide what items cost.
But
well,
wait,
the point
don't
is that
you?
you're mirroring the way that realists argue against anti-realist positions. So if it sounds stupid, then you might also think by parity of reasoning that the realist critiques of anti-realist positions are stupid. That's the whole point.
Course,
Anyway,
of course.
so
I mean,
we go back to
I wouldn't be
relativism.
here if I thought. Well, I guess maybe I would be here or whatever. But yeah, of course, I'm an anti-realist. I find that whole naming kind of ridiculous, that the anti-realists are called anti-realists even though they are the only one that are even remotely close to what's actually going on, but whatever.
Right. Okay, so let me get back to going through the whole process.
Okay,
So,
sorry.
and no, it's not. It's all good. So I looked up Lamborghini. The what I see here from just Googling it, the cheapest Lamborghini would cost you $211,000. Okay, so I go to the store. I want to get a Lamborghini. They tell me it's $211,000, and if I want any extra stuff, it's going to be way more than that. Okay, and then I say, okay, well, because price subjectivism is true, and I prefer that it actually costs $1. It in fact does cost $1, so you got to sell it to me for that. That's ridiculous. That is not going to happen. No one would take that seriously. And so far we've ruled out price non-cognitivism. It's obviously false because we can deliberate and embed claims about price in arguments. We've ruled out price culture relativism because if some culture decides their products are worth millions of dollars, we don't have to buy them for that much. That's absurd. That's false. And price subjectivism is clearly false. I don't get to decide what the prices of the products are. My preferences don't make it true that they're worth that much. And then so finally we get to price error theory. And then you would have statements like, Lamborghinis are more expensive than, I don't know, a Ford Taurus. That statement, if you're a price error theorist, that statement's false. Well, that's obviously ridiculous. Of course they're more expensive. Or imagine someone saying a pile of gold, a million pounds of gold is more expensive than a bucket of poop. Okay, if you're an error price realist, you think that's false. That is so obviously absurd. Of course, price error theory is false. And so now what we've done is exactly what Humer has done in clearly ruling out all of the anti-realist positions. Same thing here. We've ruled out all the anti-realist positions. And so price realism has to be true. And so I think if Humer's argument works, this argument works. And so price realism's got to be true or there's something wrong with Humer's argument.
The thing is, I think that this sorry, just a second.